I am Vivian, 35 years old, and my parents abandoned my 27th birthday dinner, leaving me with a massive bill because my sister claimed her boyfriend was in a life-threatening accident. I paid the tab, packed my bags, and vanished like a ghost. 8 years later, when they tried to use my childhood home to bail out that same boyfriend, they had no idea they were handing the keys directly to the financial investigator who was already seizing their assets. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. Let me take you back 8 years to the night that finally broke my loyalty. It was my 27th birthday. I had spent weeks planning a dinner at an upscale French restaurant in downtown Manhattan. I paid a $500 non-refundable deposit just to secure a private booth by the window. I wore a new emerald silk dress, hoping for once, just for one evening, my parents would look at me with genuine pride. I should have known better. My father, Thomas, and my mother, Helen, arrived 20 minutes late. They did not apologize. Instead, my mother immediately complained about the ambient lighting being too dim to read the menu, while my father grumbled about the cost of parking in the city. They took their seats immediately, checking their phones, rather than wishing me a happy birthday. The seat across from me remained empty. My younger sister Chloe was missing. When I asked where she was, my mother sighed heavily, as if my question was an unreasonable burden. Chloe has a life, Vivian. She and Marcus are dealing with some very important networking events tonight. She said she would try to make it for dessert. Do not make a big deal out of it. I forced a smile and signaled the waiter to bring the appetizers. Marcus was Chloe's new boyfriend, a charismatic African-American man who claimed to be a real estate investment founder. My parents worshipped him because he drove a leased luxury car and wore tailored suits. They constantly compared my quiet, steady accounting career to Marcus's flashy entrepreneurial lifestyle. My mother loved to remind me that while I was crunching numbers in a cubicle, Marcus was building an empire. You really should ask Marcus for some career advice, Vivian, my mother said casually, buttering her dinner roll. He just closed a massive deal on a commercial property. Meanwhile, you are still staring at spreadsheets all day. It is no wonder you are still single. Men want a woman with some dynamic energy, not a human calculator. I bit my tongue and stared at my water glass. I was working entry-level at a forensic accounting firm, putting in 60-hour weeks to build a solid foundation for my future. But in my family, hard work meant nothing if it did not come with a glamorous title and a showy lifestyle. We sat in tense silence as the waiter arrived to take our drink orders. My father asked the waiter if the restaurant carried a specific, overly expensive vintage of wine. When the waiter confirmed they did, my father ordered a bottle without even glancing at the price tag. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, knowing I was the one paying for the entire evening. But I kept quiet, desperately clinging to the hope that we could just get through one family dinner without a disaster. The waiter returned and set down our main courses. Plates of perfectly seared filet mignon and truffle mashed potatoes were placed before us. The food smelled incredible, and for a brief second, I thought we might actually enjoy the meal. Just as I picked up my fork, my mother's phone rang. The shrill ringtone shattered the quiet elegance of the restaurant. Instead of declining the call during a nice dinner, she gasped when she saw the caller ID. "It is Chloe," she said, her voice laced with immediate, disproportionate panic. My mother answered the phone and put it on speaker, resting it right next to her wine glass. Instantly, the sound of hysterical, gasping sobs echoed across our table. "Mom, help me. Please help me." Chloe's voice wailed through the speaker, loud enough that diners at the next table turned their heads to look at us. My parents completely abandoned their food. My father leaned over the table, his face pale. "Chloe, what is wrong? Where are you?" "It is Marcus," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with dramatic desperation. "We were in a terrible accident. A truck hit us out of nowhere. Marcus is hurt so badly. There is blood everywhere, Mom. The ambulance just got here, but the police are saying Marcus is at fault, and they want to arrest him right now because of some issue with his insurance. They are going to take him to jail instead of the hospital if we do not pay the liability bond right now." It was a chaotic, legally nonsensical story, But my parents swallowed it whole without a single second of hesitation. My mother clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with absolute terror. "Oh my God. How much do you need, sweetheart? Tell us what to do." "I need $10,000 transferred to Marcus's account right now so his lawyer can wire it to the authorities." Chloe sobbed heavily, her breathing sounding erratic and panicked. "If he goes to a holding cell with his injuries, he could die. Please, Mom, you have to save him." My father did not ask any clarifying questions. He did not ask to speak to the police. He simply pulled out his wallet, his hands visibly shaking as he grabbed his platinum credit card. "I am calling the bank right now to authorize the wire transfer," he promised the speakerphone. "Do not worry, Chloe. Daddy is going to fix this. Hang in there." Neither of them looked at me. My birthday, my dinner, the hundreds of dollars of food sitting untouched on the table, none of it mattered. The golden child had snapped her fingers, and they were ready to empty their bank accounts to play the heroes. I sat perfectly still listening to my mother hyperventilate, while my father barked his account numbers to a bank representative. My forensic accountant brain immediately kicked into high gear, processing the details of Chloe's frantic story. None of it made sense. Law enforcement officers do not demand immediate wire transfers to avoid booking a suspect into a holding cell. The police do not negotiate liability bonds on the side of the road at the scene of a crash. That is the anatomy of a financial scam. However, this was not a stranger calling from an unlisted number. This was my own sister using my parents' blind devotion as a weapon. While my father was placed on a brief hold by his bank, I calmly reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I opened Instagram. My sister was many things, but discreet was never one of them. She lived for validation, and her social media presence was a meticulously curated highlight reel of her fabricated elite lifestyle. I navigated to her profile. Sure enough, a glowing circle surrounded her profile picture, indicating a newly uploaded story. I tapped the screen. The video buffered for a fraction of a second before playing. Loud, pulsating music blasted through my phone speaker, the screen filled with a panoramic view of a luxury yacht cutting through deep blue water. The camera panned around, capturing the golden hour sunset before settling on the allegedly critically injured Marcus. He was completely unharmed, wearing a crisp linen shirt, unbuttoned halfway down his chest, laughing boisterously while holding a bottle of expensive champagne. Chloe leaned into the frame, her face flawless, not a single tear or drop of blood in sight. She blew a kiss to the camera and yelled over the music about living their best life. The geotag at the top of the screen proudly displayed a marina in Miami. The timestamp located at the very bottom corner confirmed the video had been uploaded exactly 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes. Right around the time we were ordering appetizers. Right around the time they realized they had overspent on their glamorous weekend and needed a quick infusion of cash to keep the party going. I stared at the screen, a cold wave of clarity washing over me. I did not feel shock. I felt a chilling confirmation of everything I had always known about my family dynamics. I placed my phone flat on the white tablecloth and slid it directly into my father's line of sight. "Look at the screen, Dad," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the panic that currently consumed him. "Look at your critically injured future son-in-law." My father glared at me, his eyes bloodshot with stress. He had the bank representative holding on the other line waiting for the final authorization to wire $10,000. "What is wrong with you, Vivian?" he snapped, his voice trembling with rage. "Your sister is stranded at a crash scene and you are shoving a phone in my face. Have you no empathy at all?" "Look at the video," I insisted, tapping the screen to replay the clip. "She is not at a crash scene. She is on a yacht in Miami. She posted this 10 minutes ago. There is no accident. There is no police officer demanding a liability bond. It is a lie. They ran out of money on their vacation, and they are using you as an ATM." My mother stopped crying and squinted at the bright screen. For a split second, I saw recognition dawn in her eyes. I saw the irrefutable visual evidence register in her mind. I saw her look at the healthy, laughing face of Marcus holding that champagne bottle. But acknowledging the truth, meant acknowledging that her golden child was a manipulator and a liar. That was a reality my parents were psychologically incapable of accepting. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful force. When faced with undeniable proof that contradicts a deeply held belief, people will often attack the source of the proof rather than change their minds. My father did exactly that. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hostility. He slammed his hand down on the table with such force that the silverware clattered loudly. His arms swung out in a wide, violent arc, purposefully catching the stem of my crystal water glass. The heavy glass tipped over instantly. Iced water and crushed ice cascaded across the table, pouring directly into my lap. The freezing liquid soaked instantly through the expensive emerald silk dress I had bought specifically for this occasion. The cold shock made me gasp, but I refused to stand up or retreat. I sat there dripping wet in the middle of the crowded restaurant, maintaining eye contact with the man who was supposed to protect me. "You are a sick, twisted girl," my father hissed, leaning over the ruined table, his voice a low, venomous growl that carried to the neighboring booths. "How dare you fabricate some old video to sabotage your sister? You edited that just to stop us from helping her. You are so consumed by your own petty jealousy that you would let Marcus go to jail just to spite Chloe." I looked at him in total disbelief. "I fabricated an Instagram story on her official account," I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You think I hacked her profile to post a fake video just to ruin this dinner? You are choosing to believe a ridiculous scam over your own eyes." My mother grabbed her purse, her face arranged in an expression of absolute disgust. "She is just bitter." "Thomas," my mother said, looking at me as if I were a stranger she found repulsive. "She has always been bitter. She cannot stand that Chloe has a successful man who loves her. She cannot stand that Marcus is building an empire while she sits alone in a cheap apartment. We are wasting time here. Chloe needs us." "You are giving $10,000 to a con artist," I stated firmly, ignoring the freezing water clinging to my skin. "He is using you. The only con artist here is the ungrateful daughter trying to tear this family apart," my father yelled, completely abandoning any sense of public decorum. "You have always been cold and calculated. You lack human compassion. Do not ever speak about Marcus or your sister that way again. They have more integrity in their little fingers than you have in your entire body." My father lifted his phone back to his ear, his tone immediately switching back to a pleading, desperate customer. "Yes, I am still here. Please process the wire transfer immediately. It is an emergency. We need to save my family." They were making their choice loudly and publicly. They were looking right past my dripping dress, right past my ruined birthday, and right past the undeniable truth. In their desperate need to maintain the illusion of Chloe's perfection, I was the necessary sacrifice. The bank representative confirmed the transfer. My father ended the call and immediately stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with furious, jerky movements. He did not spare me a single glance. My mother grabbed her cashmere wrap and slung it over her shoulders. She looked down at me, her eyes sweeping over my soaked silk dress and the shattered ice melting on my lap. The waiter approached our table looking highly uncomfortable. He held a black leather folio containing the bill. My father had ordered an incredibly rare vintage wine along with imported caviar and a lavish seafood tower before the main courses had even arrived. The waiter hesitated, holding the folio midair, unsure of who to present it to, given the obvious hostility radiating from my parents. "Give it to her," my mother commanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. The waiter placed the black folio next to my ruined water glass. I opened it and glanced at the total printed at the bottom of the receipt. $4,200. It was an astronomical sum for a 27-year-old junior accountant. It was nearly 2 months of my rent wiped out in an instant for a meal I barely even tasted. My father finally looked at me, his face a mask of cold, unyielding indifference. "We are leaving to deal with the crisis you just tried to sabotage," he stated flatly. "Do not bother coming home for Sunday dinner this week. You need to take a long, hard look at your character." My mother adjusted her purse strap on her shoulder. "Pay the bill, Vivian," she said, her voice dripping with sheer condescension. "And try not to be so selfish next time. Maybe if you focused less on ruining your sister's happiness, you would actually have a life of your own. With those final words, they turned their backs on me. I sat in silence and watched them march out of the restaurant, weaving through the tables of staring patrons. They pushed through the heavy glass doors and disappeared into the night, rushing off to save a golden child who was currently sipping champagne on a luxury yacht in Miami. I did not cry. For 27 years, I had craved their validation. I had chased perfect grades, secured a stable career, and stayed out of trouble, all in the vain hope that they would eventually look at me the way they looked at Chloe. But sitting there in a puddle of freezing water, staring at a $4,200 bill for a birthday dinner, they had completely hijacked. The last remaining thread of my familial loyalty snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic break. It was a quiet, absolute severance. The emotional fog I had lived in my entire life evaporated, leaving behind a razor-sharp clarity. They did not love me. They never would. I was nothing but a convenient prop in their stage play, a supporting character designed to make the lead actors look better and pay their tabs. I picked up the black leather folio. I reached into my purse, retrieved my corporate credit card, and placed it inside. When the waiter returned, he looked at me with deep sympathy. "I am so sorry, miss," he murmured clearly, having witnessed the entire humiliating ordeal from the sidelines. I offered him a tight, polite smile. "Please add a 20% tip for yourself," I instructed smoothly. The food was wonderful even if the company was lacking. I signed the receipt without letting my hand shake. I gathered my purse, stood up, and smoothed down my ruined emerald dress. The wet silk clung uncomfortably to my skin, and the cold air of the restaurant sent shivers down my spine, but I kept my posture completely straight. I walked out of the dining room with my head held high, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me broken. The moment I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool evening air, my mind shifted entirely to logistics. I flagged down a taxi and gave the driver the address of my apartment. During the 20-minute ride, I stared out the window at the passing city lights. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I mentally cataloged my assets, my lease agreement, and my career trajectory. When I unlocked the door to my small apartment, I moved with mechanical precision. I pulled 2 large suitcases from my closet and began packing. I did not pack memories. I did not take the framed family photos from the living room console. I took a hideous, expensive vase my mother had gifted me for my college graduation and dropped it straight into the trash bin. I packed only what I needed: professional business attire, essential documents, my laptop, and my financial records. Everything else was just dead weight. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a pair of heavy scissors. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, popped open the side tray, and extracted the SIM card. For a brief second, I looked at the tiny piece of plastic that tethered me to their endless demands, their cruel comparisons, and their toxic manipulation. I took the scissors and cut the SIM card cleanly in half. I tossed the pieces into the garbage can. I was no longer their scapegoat. I was untraceable. Using my laptop, I booked a one-way red-eye flight to New York City. The East Coast Financial District was the epicenter of forensic accounting. It was a place where sharp minds and ruthless logic were rewarded, a place where I could build an empire of my own without standing in anyone's shadow. I scheduled an email to my landlord breaking my lease and offering my remaining furniture to cover the penalty fees. I emailed my boss at the accounting firm submitting my immediate resignation and citing a sudden family emergency. It was ironic but highly effective. By midnight, I was standing in the airport terminal waiting to board my flight to John F. Kennedy International Airport. I carried nothing but my 2 suitcases and a fierce, burning ambition. The boarding call echoed through the speakers. I handed the gate agent my ticket and walked down the jet bridge. I took my seat by the window and looked out at the dark tarmac. The plane engines roared to life, vibrating powerfully through the cabin. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the night sky, I watched the city lights shrink into tiny, insignificant dots below. I was leaving the weak, desperate girl behind. I was heading to Wall Street, and I was never coming back. That was the night Vivian the daughter ceased to exist, and Vivian the investigator was born. It was the beginning of an 8-year disappearance that they would eventually deeply regret. 8 years is a long time in the financial district of Manhattan. It is enough time to transform a scared, discarded 27-year-old into the director of forensic accounting at one of Wall Street's most ruthless investigative firms. At 35, my office occupied the 42nd floor of a gleaming glass tower overlooking the Hudson River. I spent my days dissecting corporate fraud, untangling offshore shell companies, and hunting down the missing millions that arrogant men thought they had hidden perfectly. I tracked dirty money for a living, and money never lies. It leaves a paper trail, a digital footprint, a stubborn echo of truth that no amount of smooth talking can erase. My clients were federal regulators and multinational conglomerates. They paid me exorbitant fees because I did not deal in emotions or excuses. I dealt exclusively in cold, hard facts. I had built a reputation as someone who could see through any facade no matter how brilliantly it was constructed. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when my meticulously controlled present collided with the past I had buried. I was deep into reviewing a highly classified ledger for a pharmaceutical embezzlement case when my executive assistant knocked on my glass door. She walked in holding a thick cream-colored envelope wrapped in a thick silver ribbon. It had been delivered by a private premium courier, which meant it completely bypassed the standard corporate mail sorting room. My name was written across the front of the envelope in a sweeping, elegant calligraphy that made the muscles in my neck immediately tense. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It was the exact same dramatic, pretentious script my mother used for all her high society country club events. I stared at the envelope sitting on my polished mahogany desk for a long moment after my assistant closed the door. I had spent 8 years building an impenetrable fortress around my entire existence. I had legally dropped my family surname, secured unlisted phone numbers, and buried my residential address behind a maze of corporate entities. Yet my mother had somehow managed to track down my employer. I picked up a silver letter opener and sliced smoothly through the thick paper. A heavy cardstock invitation slid out onto my desk, embossed with glittering gold foil. It requested the honor of my presence at a Ruby anniversary gala celebrating 40 years of marriage between my parents. The venue was a notoriously expensive country club in their upscale suburban enclave, a place known for its exorbitant membership fees and exclusive guest lists. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh out loud in the quiet of my office. After choosing a fraudulent boyfriend over their own flesh and blood, after disowning me in a crowded restaurant and leaving me with a crushing debt, they were now formally requesting my attendance. They wanted me to act as a silent, smiling prop in their latest theatrical production of The Perfect American Family. But the formal invitation was not the only thing inside the envelope. Folded neatly behind the heavy cardstock was a piece of personalized stationery. I unfolded it and read the handwritten note from my mother. The ink was slightly smudged in several places, a deliberate, calculated touch meant to simulate falling tears. Vivian. The letter began, completely skipping any pleasantries or apologies for the last 8 years of absolute silence. I am writing this to you because your father is terribly ill. His heart condition has worsened drastically over the last few months, and his specialists are not optimistic about his recovery. This might be his last anniversary, and his dying wish is to see his family reunited under one roof. It is time to put away your childish grudges and stop punishing us for your own past failures. Come home and fulfill your duty as a daughter while you still have a father to honor. If you choose to ignore this, do not ever bother showing your face at his funeral or attempting to claim any part of his estate. I set the letter down next to my computer keyboard, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. A normal daughter might have broken down into hysterical tears right then and there. A normal daughter might have immediately panicked, scrambled to book the first flight out of New York, paralyzed by the overwhelming fear of losing a parent before having the chance to make amends. But I was not a normal daughter anymore. I was a senior forensic auditor who dealt with sociopaths and pathological liars on a daily basis. I looked closely at the extravagant gold foil on the anniversary invitation. I looked at the high-quality custom-ordered stationery used to deliver this supposed deathbed guilt trip. I analyzed the specific phrasing my mother chose to use. There was no medical diagnosis mentioned, no hospital name provided, and certainly no warmth or remorse. It was a perfectly engineered extortion attempt, leveraging morality and social obligation to force compliance. She was playing a high-stakes emotional game, attempting to extort my presence through fear and shame. They needed me there for a specific reason, and it had absolutely nothing to do with a dying wish. People who are facing imminent death do not throw lavish, highly publicized parties at exclusive country clubs to celebrate their marriage. They do not send out foil-stamped invitations months in advance. The math simply did not add up, and I despise bad math. I picked up the letter again, my eyes scanning the final threatening sentence about claiming his estate. That was the real hook. That was the leverage they thought they had over me. They assumed I was still the broke, desperate 27-year-old. They had abandoned someone who could be easily manipulated by the vague promise of future wealth. They had absolutely no clue who they were dealing with now. I turned away from the gold foil invitation and the tear-smudged letter sitting on my desk. I swiveled my chair toward my workstation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I began to type. I did not grab my phone to call my mother in a panic. I did not text my sister about my father and his supposed failing heart. Instead, I accessed the proprietary investigative database my firm utilized for corporate espionage and high-level financial tracking. The software required biometric authentication and multiple layers of encrypted passwords. Once logged into the network, I had access to a digital footprint spanning the globe. I typed my father's full legal name, his social security number, which I had memorized since childhood, and his current residential zip code into the primary search terminal. I hit enter and watched the screen populate with decades of highly categorized public and private records. When people lie, their words carry weight, but their data carries the absolute truth. I was going to find out exactly how close my father was to his deathbed. If a man is truly dying of a severe heart condition, the medical billing footprint is massive. There would be extensive insurance claims, continuous pharmacy refills for specialized medications, hospital admissions, and astronomical co-payments. A terminal illness is a financial black hole, and it is impossible to hide those transactions from a forensic accountant. I routed my secure search query through our medical insurance claims database. I filtered the search results for the last 24 months, focusing specifically on cardiology specialists and emergency room visits in their local county. The search bar loaded for 10 seconds before displaying the finalized results. The screen was practically empty. I scrolled carefully through the limited medical billing history associated with my father. He had visited a local general practitioner for an annual physical checkup exactly 6 months ago. He had filled a standard prescription for a generic cholesterol medication, which was a common occurrence for a man of his age. There were only 2 additional claims for routine dental cleanings. I checked the pharmaceutical records for any strong pain management drugs or advanced heart medications. There was absolutely nothing. He was not receiving specialized care. He was not on a transplant list. He had not spent a single night in a hospital bed in well over a decade. The terminal heart condition was a complete and utter fabrication, invented purely to drag me back into their twisted web of control. I leaned closer to the monitor, scanning the glowing screen, as I pivoted my investigation from his medical records to his recent financial activity. If my father was not dying in a hospital, I desperately needed to know exactly what he was doing with his money. I bypassed his banking privacy walls using a legitimate subpoena backdoor we kept available for preliminary asset verification. I pulled up his primary credit card statements covering the last 90 days. If a man is preparing to say a final goodbye to his family, his spending habits always reflect a sudden halt. Instead, my father had been spending money with reckless enthusiasm. The credit card ledger told a fascinating story of a man who was very much alive and enjoying a robust lifestyle. Just 3 weeks ago, there was a $10,000 initiation fee paid directly to the Oak Ridge Valley Country Club, one of the most exclusive and physically demanding golf clubs in their state. A dying man certainly does not invest in a long-term luxury golf membership. I continued scrolling down the detailed, itemized list of his recent extravagant purchases. There were recurring expensive charges for a private tennis instructor. There was a receipt for $3,000 spent at a bespoke tailor for custom-fitted suits. Just last week, he had paid for a highly rated private wine tasting event, which was immediately followed by a massive dinner bill at a premier local steakhouse. I reviewed his physical movements through these digital transaction receipts. He was driving to the golf course 3 times a week, dining out frequently, and buying premium imported cigars. The hard data painted a vivid picture of a man in peak physical condition, living a life of affluent leisure without a single care in the world. I felt a dark, bitter smile form on my face as I absorbed the scope of their lie. My mother had sat at her desk, pulled out premium stationery, and crafted a lie so vile it would destroy a normal person. She used the fabricated death of my father as a weapon. They assumed I would be blinded by overwhelming grief and daughterly devotion. They expected me to drop my career board a plane and rush back to their suburban mansion in a state of emotional vulnerability. They wanted me off balance, desperate, and eager to please. It was the exact same tactic they used when Chloe faked a car accident to steal money. Now they were using it on me. I highlighted the golf club fee and tailor receipts on my screen, saving the files to a secure external drive. Their scheme was impressive in its depravity. I sat back and took a deep breath. Discovering the fake illness was only the first layer of this massive deception. They did not summon me back after 8 years of absolute silence, simply because they missed having a reliable scapegoat to kick around. My parents were vain, but they were also highly strategic when it came to their finances. They wanted something specific from me. The anniversary party, the fake illness, and the demand for a reunion were orchestrated props for a much larger play. I needed to figure out what was happening behind their perfect facade. I cleared the search terminal and cracked my knuckles in the silent office. If my father was healthy, then the true rot in our family was hiding somewhere else. I had to follow the money. I shifted my focus away from my parents and directed my attention to the actual parasite draining their resources. Marcus, my sister's supposedly brilliant self-made entrepreneur husband. For 8 years, I had ignored their existence, but I knew the basics from the rare moments my curiosity got the better of me. Marcus portrayed himself online as a titan of commercial real estate. He posted photos of construction sites, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and motivational quotes about grinding for success. It was a perfectly constructed illusion designed to attract investors who were foolish enough to believe that a leased sports car equated to financial stability. I needed to see what was hiding beneath the surface of his flashy digital footprint. I typed his full legal name into our federal corporate registry database. The system immediately generated a complex web of limited liability companies, all registered under his name or variations of his initials. There were dozens of them, spanning across multiple states with notoriously lax corporate transparency laws. To a layman, a vast portfolio of corporate entities might look like a thriving business empire. To a forensic accountant, it looks like a labyrinth designed to obscure the movement of illicit funds. Legitimate businessmen do not need 20 different shell companies to manage a handful of suburban strip malls. I selected his primary holding company, the one he prominently listed on his professional profiles, and initiated a deep dive into its financial health. The loading icon spun on my screen for several seconds before the financial disclosures appeared. I scanned the balance sheets, the profit and loss statements, and the cash flow reports. The numbers were disastrous. His entire real estate fund was nothing but a fragile house of cards built on severely leveraged debt. Marcus was not buying properties with liquid capital. He was taking out massive high-interest loans to acquire struggling commercial spaces, using the projected future rental income to secure even more loans. It was a dangerous, unsustainable cycle of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. The corporate accounts showed a terrifying lack of actual liquid assets. Every single dollar that came into the fund was immediately siphoned out to cover the interest payments on previous debts, or worse, transferred directly to his personal accounts to fund his luxury lifestyle. The yachts, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners my sister constantly flaunted on social media, they were all financed by defrauding his investors. He was bleeding the company dry to maintain the appearance of wealth. But the most alarming detail was not the staggering amount of corporate debt. It was the complete lack of recent tax filings. I opened a secure gateway to the Internal Revenue Service database, a tool reserved strictly for our firm's highest-level federal investigations. I cross-referenced his primary holding company and his personal Social Security number. The screen flashed bright red. Marcus was not just struggling financially. He was the target of an active, highly classified federal audit. The IRS had flagged his entire network of shell companies for severe tax evasion, suspected money laundering, and gross misrepresentation of corporate assets. The federal government had placed a massive lien on his accounts. He owed millions in back taxes and penalties. The authorities were actively closing in, tightening a noose around his neck that he could not charm his way out of. A federal audit of this magnitude does not just happen by accident. It is triggered by persistent, undeniable patterns of financial deception. The walls were rapidly closing in on Marcus and my sister. They were absolutely desperate for cash to keep the authorities at bay, or at the very least to fund a legal defense when the inevitable indictments were handed down. This was the true reason for the sudden tear-jerking invitation. My parents were not reaching out to me because they wanted a family reunion. They were reaching out because they were sinking and they needed a lifeline to pull Marcus out of the wreckage. I stared at the glowing red flags on my monitor, my mind working rapidly to process the full scope of their desperation. Out of pure professional habit, I copied the specific federal case file number assigned to Marcus's audit. I opened my firm's internal client management portal to see which government agency was spearheading the prosecution. I pasted the case number into our internal search bar and hit enter. The result that popped up on my screen made my breath catch in my throat. I had to read the text 3 times to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. The Internal Revenue Service had outsourced the forensic tracing of Marcus's shell companies. The federal government frequently contracted private, highly specialized investigative firms to dismantle complex financial crimes before presenting them to a grand jury. The firm they had contracted for this specific high-profile real estate fraud case was my firm. I looked at the lead investigator assigned to the file. It was my department. The case had just been transferred to our division 48 hours ago, waiting to be assigned to a senior director. I was the senior director. My family, in their infinite arrogance and staggering ignorance, had sent a manipulative extortion letter to the exact woman who was currently holding the power to dismantle their entire fraudulent existence. They wanted to use me as a pawn to save a man who was already sitting in my crosshairs. I closed the internal portal and leaned back in my chair, a profound sense of satisfaction settling over me. The universe has a strange, poetic way of delivering justice. They thought they were luring a naive, emotionally vulnerable daughter back into their web of deceit. They had absolutely no idea they were inviting their own executioner to the dinner table. I picked up the gold foil invitation and traced the elegant calligraphy with my finger. I was no longer considering whether or not I should attend this anniversary gala. I was absolutely going. I would not miss this party for the world. I opened my email client and drafted a quick, decisive message to my executive assistant. I instructed her to formally assign the Marcus real estate fraud case directly to my personal desk. I wanted exclusive, unrestricted access to every single hidden bank account, every fraudulent loan application, and every forged tax document he had ever filed. I was going to rip his empire apart piece by piece, and I was going to do it with a smile on my face. The sheer audacity of their plan fueled a cold, calculating energy in my veins. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of deception. I was ready to show them exactly how professionals play. I closed the IRS portal and opened a new tab to book my travel arrangements. I was not going to sneak back into my hometown like a prodigal daughter seeking forgiveness. I booked a first-class ticket on a direct flight leaving Thursday morning, ensuring I would arrive with plenty of time before their grand anniversary gala on Saturday. I selected a premium black car service to meet me at the airport. If my family wanted a show of wealth and status, I would give them a performance they would never forget. I minimized the browser and opened my encrypted case files. The next 48 hours were a blur of intense surgical financial extraction. I did not leave my office. I ordered black coffee and meals directly to my desk. My eyes locked on the dual monitors as I mapped out every single fraudulent transaction Marcus had ever authorized. I traced the money flowing out of his investors' accounts and watched it cascade into Chloe's personal spending habits. The level of financial negligence was almost insulting. They had not even tried to hide their tracks with any real sophistication. They simply relied on the assumption that no one would ever look closely enough to question their glittering facade. I was looking, and the picture was incredibly ugly. I routed the most damning financial records to the secure laser printer humming in the corner of my office. I wanted physical, undeniable proof. Digital files can be dismissed as fake or misunderstood, but a stack of certified watermarked bank statements carries a physical weight that cannot be ignored. The printer churned out hundreds of pages of indisputable truth. I collected the warm stacks of paper and brought them to my large mahogany conference table. I spread the documents out, organizing them by entity, by date, and by the specific laws they violated. It was a masterpiece of corporate crime laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office. I saw how my parents fit into this toxic ecosystem. I pulled their current property records and mortgage statements. The suburban mansion they were so proud of, the very house where they planned to host their intimate family gatherings before the big gala was drowning in secondary loans. They had secretly remortgaged their home 3 months ago, pulling out massive amounts of equity. The timeline lined up perfectly with Marcus's initial federal audit flags. They had drained their own safety net to throw cash into the black hole of his failing real estate fund. They were all financially bleeding out together. I walked over to my supply cabinet and pulled out 3 distinct heavy-duty crimson folders. Red is a warning. Red is a stop sign. Red is the color of an account in severe deficit. It was the perfect visual framing for the destruction I was about to hand them. I opened the first red folder and placed Marcus's federal audit notice right on top. Beneath it, I stacked the spreadsheets detailing his $4 million Ponzi scheme, highlighting the specific transfers that proved he was paying old investors with new investors' money. I closed it and moved to the second folder. This one was reserved exclusively for my sister. Chloe had always played the innocent, pampered wife, but the bank records told a vastly different story. While Marcus was desperately trying to keep his fraudulent empire afloat, Chloe had quietly opened a hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands. She had been systematically siphoning $500,000 out of his failing business, preparing her own golden parachute for when he inevitably went to prison. She was planning to abandon him just like she had gladly watched my parents abandon me. I tucked those specific wire transfer receipts securely into her folder. The third and final red folder was dedicated to my parents. I placed their original mortgage documents on one side and the defaulted secondary loan notices on the other. But I saved the best piece of leverage for last. During my sweep of their creditors, I discovered that the distressed debt firm that recently purchased my parents' defaulted mortgage was a subsidiary entity entirely controlled by my own financial firm. Through a brilliant stroke of corporate acquisition, my department had ultimate authority over their debt collection. I printed the 14-day eviction notice, stamped with my firm's official seal, and slipped it into the back pocket of the third folder. They thought they still held the power to grant or deny me access to the family. They did not realize I literally owned the roof over their heads. I stacked the 3 red folders and placed them inside my leather briefcase. I locked the clasp with a satisfying click, Thursday morning arrived with crisp, cold air. I stood in my minimalist apartment dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit that screamed corporate authority. I grabbed my briefcase and headed to the airport. The first-class lounge was quiet, allowing me to review my strategy one last time. I boarded the plane, took my spacious seat, and drank a glass of sparkling water before takeoff. As the aircraft soared toward my hometown, I felt an absolute, unshakable calm. I was not the scared 27-year-old girl running away in the dead of night anymore. I was a 35-year-old apex predator returning to her natural hunting ground. The flight landed smoothly and I stepped into the arrivals terminal. My private driver was waiting, holding a discreet placard with my name. I climbed into the back of the sleek black town car, the leather seats cool against my skin. The driver navigated onto the highway, heading straight for the upscale suburban neighborhood I had sworn to leave behind forever. I looked out the tinted window at the passing trees, my hand resting gently on the briefcase beside me. I was now more than ready to step out of this car and serve as their absolute executioner. The black town car glided smoothly through the towering wrought iron gates of my parents' suburban estate. The tires crunched softly against the pristine gravel driveway. From the outside, the sprawling brick mansion looked exactly as opulent as it had 8 years ago. The sweeping manicured lawns were vibrant green, and the grand columns framing the entrance projected an air of generational wealth. However, my trained eyes immediately caught the subtle, undeniable signs of financial distress hiding just beneath the polished surface. The landscaping lacked the sharp precision of professional seasonal maintenance. The exterior window frames desperately needed a fresh coat of paint. The decorative fountain in the center of the circular driveway was completely dry, likely shut off to save on exorbitant utility bills. They were bleeding cash, pouring every last cent into maintaining an illusion for their wealthy neighbors. The driver stopped the car right at the front steps and quickly circled around to open my door. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, smoothing the fabric of my charcoal suit. I grabbed the heavy leather briefcase containing their absolute destruction and walked up the wide stone steps. I did not bother to ring the doorbell. I grasped the heavy brass handle and pushed the front door open, stepping directly into the grand foyer. The house was alive with the buzzing, hollow energy of a high society gathering. Soft jazz music floated through the air, mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of pretentious conversations. I handed my coat to a hired catering assistant and walked purposefully toward the main living room. I expected gasps. I expected a dramatic pause. I expected someone to ask where I had been for nearly a decade. Instead, I was met with the chilling, seamless integration of a family that specialized in denying reality. My mother Helen spotted me from across the room. She was wearing a heavy silk dress and her signature fake smile. She glided over to me, her arms outstretched in a perfectly choreographed display of maternal affection meant purely for the audience of country club wives surrounding her. "Vivian, darling, you finally made it!" she announced loudly, ensuring everyone in a 10-foot radius could hear her. "We were just telling the Henderson family how busy you have been with your little accounting job on the East Coast." She pulled me into a stiff, suffocating hug. She did not whisper an apology. She did not ask how I was doing. She simply treated me like a slightly tardy guest who had just returned from a brief business trip. I endured the embrace with a rigid spine, offering a tight, polite smile to the watching guests. My father Thomas stood near the fireplace. He gave me a brief dismissive nod and immediately returned his attention to his drink. There was no joy in his eyes, only a calculating assessment of my tailored suit. The true center of attention, however, was holding court in the middle of the room. Marcus, my sister Chloe's husband, was performing his favorite role. He was dressed in an aggressively flashy, custom-tailored navy suit paired with a silk pocket square and a massive gold watch that caught the light every time he moved his hands. He was a tall, striking African-American man who knew exactly how to leverage his charisma. He projected the ultimate image of a self-made barrier, breaking visionary effortlessly, commanding the attention of the affluent older white men circling him. He held a crystal glass of expensive scotch, swirling the amber liquid as he projected his booming voice across the room. We just closed on a massive commercial development down in Atlanta, Marcus boasted, flashing a brilliant, blinding smile. It is a multi-million-dollar acquisition. We are completely revitalizing the downtown sector, bringing in high-end retail and luxury condominiums. The market is incredibly competitive right now, but when you have the right vision and the right capital backing, the sky is the absolute limit. The older men nodded in profound agreement, captivated by his smooth delivery and unwavering confidence. They looked at him with sheer admiration, entirely unaware that the charismatic entrepreneur standing before them was nothing more than a desperate con artist drowning in federal tax liens. I stood silently near the archway, my grip tightening on the handle of my briefcase. I listened to his pitch, mentally matching every single lie he told to the devastating truths locked inside my red folders. I knew the exact Atlanta property he was bragging about. It was a crumbling, half-abandoned strip mall. His shell company had defaulted on the high-interest development loan 3 months ago, and the property was currently facing imminent foreclosure. He was not revitalizing anything. He was simply using the illusion of the Atlanta project to scam new investors out of their retirement funds to pay off his old debts. Marcus finally noticed me standing by the archway. His eyes swept over my professional attire, his smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before returning with full blinding force. He did not ask where I had been for the last 8 years. He did not ask why I had missed his wedding to Chloe. He immediately pivoted the conversation to ensure he remained the dominant force in the room. Vivian, Marcus called out, gesturing for me to step closer. Look who decided to take a break from the cubicle to join the winner's circle. Chloe told me you are still grinding away at that same accounting firm. It takes a lot of stamina to work for other people your whole life. You really should let me take you out to lunch sometime. I can give you some pointers on how to build passive income and start generating real wealth. He chuckled, and the men around him joined in a chorus of wealthy sycophants laughing at my expense. He was trying to establish immediate dominance, painting me as the mundane, struggling worker bee, while elevating himself as the financial genius of the family. I looked at his flashy gold watch, knowing it was likely purchased with funds stolen from the very men laughing beside him. I offered him a sharp, razor-thin smile. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, I replied, my voice steady and perfectly modulated to carry across the sudden quiet of the room. But my specific field of financial investigation keeps me incredibly busy these days. You would be absolutely amazed by the sheer volume of fraudulent executives who think they know how to hide their assets. Marcus stiffened the muscles in his jaw, clenching tightly. The easy, confident swagger momentarily vanished from his posture. He opened his mouth to reply, but the heavy oak doors to the library swung open, shifting the attention of the room. Helen and Thomas had decided the opening act was over. It was time for the main event. Before Marcus could recover his composure or offer a witty rebuttal, Chloe emerged from the library. My younger sister moved with the practiced elegance of a woman who believed the entire world existed solely to serve as her personal runway. She wore a floor-length champagne silk gown that clung to her figure, her blonde hair styled in flawless, expensive waves. The guests naturally parted to let her through, offering admiring glances and hushed compliments. She soaked up their adoration effortlessly, playing the role of the beautiful, successful wife to absolute perfection. She was the ultimate golden child. Chloe spotted me standing near the archway, and her eyes instantly narrowed. The sweet, gracious smile she had been giving the country club wives vanished entirely, replaced by a look of sharp, unfiltered condescension. She glided across the polished hardwood floor, her designer heels clicking rhythmically against the expensive wood. Vivian, she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. You actually showed up. I told Mom it was a 50-50 chance. You always did struggle with family commitments and showing up for the people who care about you. She did not offer a hug. She did not even extend a hand in greeting. Instead, she deliberately lifted her left hand to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The movement was entirely unnecessary, executed solely to display the massive, blindingly bright diamond ring sitting on her finger. The stone was enormous, easily 4 carats, set in a heavy platinum band that caught the light from the chandeliers above. It was an obnoxious, aggressive display of wealth. It was also according to the financial documents currently locked inside my briefcase entirely and completely unpaid for. The luxury jewelry store had placed a severe legal lien on Marcus's corporate account 2 months ago because the payment check had bounced spectacularly. I see you are admiring my upgrade, Chloe said, noticing my gaze. Marcus surprised me with it for our anniversary last month. He said a highly successful man needs his wife to perfectly reflect his massive achievements. It is a flawless cut. But I suppose you would not really know much about expensive things like this. I took a slow, measured sip from the glass of red wine a passing waiter had handed me. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper meant only for me, but laced with maximum cruelty. Honestly, Vivian, I was genuinely worried you would feel too out of place here. Everyone in this grand room has built something substantial. And you are what, 35 now? Still living alone in some tiny apartment, still grinding away, analyzing basic receipts for a boss who probably barely knows your name. It must be so completely exhausting to work for someone else your entire life and have absolutely nothing significant to show for your decades of relentless, unappreciated corporate struggle. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes scanning my tailored charcoal suit with blatant pity. I mean, look at you. You are still wearing the same boring corporate uniform you wore in your 20s. You have no husband to provide for you. You have no children to carry on your legacy. You just have your sad spreadsheets. Do you ever wake up and realize you completely wasted your best years? The sheer audacity of her specific insults was breathtaking. She was standing in a massive house facing imminent foreclosure, wearing a completely stolen diamond ring. She was married to a man currently under severe federal investigation, and she had the nerve to pity me. A younger, weaker version of myself might have crumbled under the heavy weight of her vicious words. The old Vivian would have felt a hot flush of shame, desperate to defend her career and justify her existence to a sister who only measured human value in carat weight and zip codes. But the woman standing in the foyer tonight felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I did not feel the slightest need to defend my six-figure salary. I did not need to explain my pristine, debt-free financial portfolio. I did not need to explain the immense power I wielded in my industry. When you hold the absolute truth in your hands, you do not need to argue with someone living in a fragile fantasy. I let the silence stretch heavily between us. I took another slow sip of my wine, maintaining unbroken eye contact. I watched the slight tremor in her hand as she held her champagne flute. I noticed the tiny lines of stress forming around her perfectly manicured and carefully painted eyes. She was projecting dominance, but her body language betrayed a deep, underlying panic. She knew Marcus's business was rapidly failing. She knew the money was running out. She was lashing out at me because I represented the cold, hard reality she was desperately trying to avoid. You are right about one thing, Chloe. I finally said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I do look at receipts for a living, and you would be absolutely terrified if you knew what those receipts actually reveal about the very prominent people standing inside this beautiful, heavily mortgaged room tonight. Chloe frowned, her perfectly sculpted brow furrowing in sudden confusion. What is that supposed to mean? Before I could deliver the next calculated blow, my mother's voice cut through the ambient noise of the party. Vivian Helen called out from the library doorway. Her tone was sharp and authoritative, brooking no argument. Your father and I need to speak with you in the study. Right now. Chloe immediately masked her confusion with a triumphant smirk. She assumed I was about to be severely reprimanded for my failure to grovel for forgiveness. You better go, Vivian. Chloe whispered, her voice returning to its usual mocking lilt. Try not to disappoint them again, though I suppose that is asking too much of you. I did not respond to her petty parting shot. I simply adjusted my grip on my heavy leather briefcase. I walked past my sister, leaving her standing in the foyer with her unpaid diamond and her fabricated reality. The main event had finally arrived, and I was more than ready to take my seat. I crossed the threshold into my father's private study. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, instantly silencing the lively chatter and clinking glasses of the anniversary gala outside. The ambient noise was replaced by a stifling quiet. The study was exactly as I remembered it. Dark mahogany bookshelves lined the walls filled with leather-bound volumes that my father had never actually read. The room smelled of expensive scotch and stale cigars. It was designed to intimidate, built to make whoever stood on the opposite side of the desk feel completely insignificant. My mother marched past me and locked the doors. The moment the brass deadbolt clicked into place, the radiant smile she'd been wearing all evening vanished entirely. Her facial muscles relaxed into their natural state of rigid, calculating coldness. My father was already standing behind his imposing desk. He was not clutching his chest. He was not gasping for breath. He was standing tall and perfectly straight, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler. I looked at him, letting my eyes travel from his polished leather shoes to his perfectly tailored suit jacket. "It is an absolute medical miracle," I stated, keeping my voice flat. "Just last week, you were on your deathbed facing a terminal heart condition. Tonight, you are hosting a gala and drinking hard liquor. You should consider donating your medical records to Science Dad. The cardiology community would be fascinated by your spontaneous recovery." My father did not flinch. He took a slow sip of his scotch and set the glass down with a heavy thud. "Drop the attitude, Vivian," he ordered, his voice echoing sharply. "We do not have time for your childish theatrics tonight. We are stepping away from our own anniversary party, so we are going to make this extremely quick and efficient." My mother stood beside him, forming their usual united front. She crossed her arms. "We only wrote that letter to ensure you would show up," she explained, displaying a breathtaking lack of remorse for fabricating a terminal illness. "You have been ignoring your familial duties for 8 years. You forced our hand. We had to use drastic measures to get you back here because we have an urgent family matter requiring your immediate legal compliance." I remained standing near the center of the room, my fingers gripping the handle of my briefcase. I refused to sit down or yield the physical high ground. "A family matter," I repeated, raising one eyebrow. "That is a fascinating choice of words, considering you publicly disowned me and explicitly told me I was no longer part of this family." "That is ancient history," my mother snapped, waving her hand dismissively as if erasing decades of abuse. "We are willing to let bygones be bygones. We are willing to welcome you back into the fold provided you start acting like a responsible adult and help us manage a serious liability." My father opened the top drawer of his desk. He pulled out a stack of legal papers bound by a blue paperclip. He tossed the stack onto the center of the desk. It landed with a heavy smack. He tapped his index finger against the top page. "This is a power of attorney document," my father stated, his tone shifting into his aggressive corporate negotiation voice. "It gives me complete executive control over the mountain cabin your grandmother left you." I looked at the legal document resting on the polished wood. The cabin. My grandmother had left me a stunning log home on 50 acres of prime real estate. She was the only person who saw my true worth, and she deliberately bypassed my parents to leave her asset directly to me. At the current market rate, that property was easily worth $1.5 million. "You vanished 8 years ago," my mother interjected, stepping forward and tapping the document. "You abandoned your responsibilities. That cabin has been sitting empty, gathering dust, and depreciating in value. It is a massive liability. Since you clearly have no interest in maintaining it and lack the financial acumen to manage real estate of that magnitude, your father and I are stepping in to take over the asset." "You want me to sign over the legal rights to a $1.5 million property?" I asked, keeping my voice mild and inquisitive as if I were genuinely considering their absurd proposal. "It is the only logical solution," my father insisted, leaning over the desk to intimidate me with his physical presence. "We are going to liquidate the property. The family requires immediate capital to facilitate a temporary business turnaround. We will manage it the way it should have been managed years ago." They were incredibly predictable. They thought I was still the terrified, broke 27-year-old who would blindly sign anything to earn their validation. They assumed I had abandoned the cabin when I fled to New York. They believed it was just sitting there, an untapped gold mine waiting for them to harvest. They needed that exact $1.5 million desperately to plug the massive hole in Marcus's fraudulent real estate fund, before the federal auditors knocked their entire front door off its hinges. I looked at the blank signature line at the bottom of the power of attorney document. I looked at the expensive pen my father had placed right next to it. They had orchestrated this entire elaborate performance, the fake illness, the fancy invitation, the grand party, all for this single piece of paper. They brought me back just to bleed me dry one last time. I felt a cold, sharp smile slowly spread across my face. I placed my heavy leather briefcase right on top of his pristine mahogany desk, letting it rest directly over their fraudulent legal documents. I looked my father dead in the eyes, stripping away every ounce of the respectful daughter I used to be. "Move your bag, Vivian!" My father snapped his voice, dropping an octave into a dangerous, gravelly tone. "This is not a negotiation. You are going to sign that document, and then you can go back to whatever mediocre life you have built for yourself in New York." Temporary capital turnaround, I repeated, letting the corporate buzzword roll off my tongue slowly. I kept my hands resting firmly on the top of my leather briefcase. That is an incredibly specific financial term, Dad. It implies a cash flow bottleneck, but that does not make any sense. Marcus was just standing in the foyer holding a glass of expensive scotch, telling a crowd of very wealthy men that his real estate fund is overflowing with capital. He said he just closed a massive development deal in Atlanta. So why exactly does a titan of commercial real estate need to liquidate a dusty mountain cabin belonging to the sister-in-law he despises? My mother stepped forward, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her silk dress. "Marcus is executing deals on a scale you simply cannot comprehend," she stated, her voice sharp and patronizing. "When you deal in multi-million-dollar commercial properties, a vast amount of capital gets temporarily tied up in escrow accounts and development bonds. It is a standard liquidity constraint. Chloe and Marcus just need a quick injection of liquid cash to bridge a brief gap before their next massive payout. We are keeping it in the family to avoid unnecessary bank interest rates. It is just smart business." "Smart business?" I echoed, nodding slowly as if I were taking her ridiculous explanation under serious consideration. "So let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this brilliant financial strategy. I sign over a property worth $1.5 million. You immediately sell it. You hand the cash directly to Marcus. And then what does Marcus give me equity in his Atlanta project? Do I get a legally binding promissory note with a fixed interest rate? Or is this just a charitable donation to the Chloe and Marcus Luxury Lifestyle Fund?" My father's face reddened, the veins in his neck beginning to visibly bulge against the stiff collar of his dress shirt. "You do not ask for equity, you ungrateful girl," he spat, slamming his palm against the edge of the mahogany desk. "This family raised you. We put a roof over your head. We paid for your basic needs for 18 years. You owe this family. You owe your sister. You have been hoarding an asset you do not even use while your own blood relatives are orchestrating deals that will secure the legacy for generations." I tilted my head, studying him with cold clinical detachment. Forensic accountants are trained to look for the precise moment a suspect realizes their story is falling apart. I was watching my parents hit that exact threshold. "If the legacy is so incredibly secure," I countered, my voice perfectly level, "why doesn't the mighty Thomas just write his son-in-law a check? You are wearing a custom-tailored suit. You just paid a $10,000 initiation fee at the Oak Ridge Valley Country Club. You threw this lavish caterer heavy ruby anniversary gala. You are clearly swimming in disposable income. Why do you need my dead grandmother's cabin to bail out Marcus?" The question hung in the stagnant air of the study like a physical threat. My father blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by my specific knowledge of his recent country club membership. He quickly recovered, puffing out his chest to project dominance. "My capital is strategically deployed in high-yield long-term investment vehicles," my father blustered, using loud financial jargon to mask his absolute lack of liquidity. "I cannot just liquidate my portfolios on a whim without incurring massive tax penalties. It is entirely inefficient. Your cabin is a stagnant, unmanaged asset. It is the most logical piece of capital to leverage right now. We are giving you the opportunity to finally contribute something meaningful to this family instead of just taking up space." My mother moved closer, changing her tactic from aggressive to manipulative. She let out a heavy theatrical sigh, playing the exhausted matriarch carrying the burden of a fractured family. Vivian, please look at the reality of your situation, she said, her voice dripping with toxic, weaponized pity. You are 35 years old. You have no husband, you have no children, you have no real legacy to protect. Chloe has a thriving marriage. She has a highly successful husband who is doing important work. They need this capital to continue building a life that actually matters. What are you possibly going to do with $1.5 million? Buy more pantsuits. You are being incredibly selfish by hoarding wealth you do not even need. I let her insulting words hang in the silent room. I wanted them to completely empty their arsenal of manipulation. I wanted them to put every single one of their repulsive, greedy motivations right out in the open. They were not asking for a favor. They were demanding a sacrifice. They viewed my entire existence as nothing more than a convenient emergency fund to prop up the golden child. So just to be absolutely clear, I said, leaning my weight onto the desk, closing the physical distance between my father and me. You want me to sign away my only inheritance. You want to give the proceeds to a man who mocked me in your foyer not 10 minutes ago. You want to do this because his business is allegedly experiencing a temporary liquidity constraint, and because your own vast wealth is supposedly tied up in high-yield investments. And you believe I should comply because my life as an unmarried working woman holds absolutely no inherent value compared to Chloe's fabricated suburban perfection. That is exactly right, my father declared, his chest puffed out with arrogant certainty. You finally understand your position. Now pick up that pen, sign the document, and maybe, just maybe, we will allow you to stay for the dessert course. I looked at the gold-plated pen resting on the desk. I looked at the power of attorney document. I looked at the two people who had spent their entire lives tearing me down to build my sister up. They had fallen perfectly into the trap. They had verbally committed to every single lie, cementing their own fraudulent narrative right in front of me. They were completely convinced they had cornered the weak, compliant daughter. I think I understand the situation perfectly, Dad, I whispered, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm. I moved my hand away from the power of attorney document and rested my fingers gently on the brass locks of my briefcase. But before I sign anything, I think we should take a much closer look at these high-yield investments of yours. And we should definitely discuss the real reason Marcus needs $1.5 million by Monday morning. The click of my briefcase locks echoed like a gunshot in the silent study. My father stared at my hands, his face contorting from momentary confusion into absolute explosive rage. He did not ask what I meant by high-yield investments. He did not ask what I knew about Marcus's Monday morning deadline. To him, my defiance was not a warning, it was an act of treason. "How dare you!" he roared, the volume of his voice rattling the glass panels of the antique bookcase. "How dare you come into my house, stand in my study, and speak to me with that condescending tone? You know absolutely nothing about the mechanics of wealth. You are a glorified calculator. You sit in a cubicle and tally up the achievements of actual visionaries like Marcus." My mother lunged forward, her pristine composure entirely forgotten. Her face was flushed, the tendons in her neck straining against her pearl necklace. "You are a miserable, selfish spinster," Helen spat, pointing a shaking finger inches from my face. "You are exactly the same spiteful, jealous girl who ruined her own birthday dinner 8 years ago. You could not stand seeing your sister happy then, and you cannot stand it now. You have spent your entire adult life rotting away in isolation. Look at yourself. 35 years old and completely alone. No man wants a woman who radiates this much bitterness. You have no husband to protect you. You have no children to care for. You have nothing but a cold apartment and an inflated sense of self-importance. Chloe has built a beautiful home. She has given us a legacy. Marcus is a self-made man who pulled himself up from nothing to build a real estate empire. He is a provider. He is a leader. He takes risks that you would not even dare to dream about because you are too cowardly to step outside your pathetic little safety net. My father pounded the desk again, the heavy thud vibrating through the soles of my shoes. Marcus is out there in the trenches making deals that shape city skylines. Thomas bellowed, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. A man of his caliber requires capital backing to execute his vision. That is how dynasties are forged. Families pool their resources to elevate their most capable members. But you would not understand loyalty. You abandoned us. You changed your phone number and vanished like a coward because we asked you to pay a single restaurant bill. You ran away from your obligations, and now you have the absolute audacity to return and question our financial strategies. You are a parasite, Vivian. You are hoarding an asset that could secure your sister's future simply because you are obsessed with punishing us for recognizing her superiority. It makes you a petty, pathetic hoarder. You do not deserve that property. Your grandmother was losing her mind when she wrote that will. If she were in her right mind, she would have seen that Chloe and Marcus are the only ones capable of managing true wealth. I stood perfectly still, letting the tidal wave of their verbal abuse wash completely over me. I did not flinch when my father's spit hit the polished mahogany desk. I did not blink when my mother stepped so close I could smell the expensive gin on her breath. Every insult they hurled, every vicious attack on my character, my career, and my personal life, only solidified the absolute 0-degree temperature of my resolve. They were revealing the ugliest depths of their souls. They truly believed that Marcus, a man currently dodging federal indictments, was a paragon of virtue simply because he wore a Rolex and spoke in loud, confident buzzwords. They truly believed my worth was tied exclusively to my utility as their financial safety net. "You will sign this document!" My mother screamed, her voice cracking under the intense strain of her own hysteria. "You will sign it right now, or I swear to God, Vivian, I will make sure you never have a moment of peace. We will drag you into court. We will contest your grandmother's will. We will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are forced to sell that cabin just to pay your attorneys. We will tell everyone in our circle exactly what kind of monster you are. We will ruin your professional reputation. Who would ever hire an accountant who deliberately sabotages her own family's business ventures out of sheer, unadulterated spite? You will have nothing left." My father leaned in, placing both of his large hands flat on the desk, looming over the power of attorney document. He bared his teeth in a predatory snarl. "You are going to pick up that pen, Vivian. You are going to sign your name on the dotted line, and then you are going to walk out the back door so our guests do not have to look at your miserable face anymore. You are going to do exactly what you are told, because you are nothing without us. You are a failure. Marcus is the son I actually wanted. Chloe is the daughter who actually matters. You are just a disposable asset. Sign the paper." I looked at my mother's furious face. I looked at my father's aggressive posture. They had exhausted their repertoire of manipulation. They had moved past guilt trips and sailed straight into blatant threats and raw emotional terrorism. They had laid all their cards on the table, totally blind to the fact that they were playing a game they had already lost. I did not even attempt to reach for the expensive gold-plated pen. Instead, I calmly and firmly grasped the heavy brass zippers of my leather briefcase. I pushed the small metal buttons inward. The heavy latches sprang open with a loud, definitive clack. It was finally time to show them exactly what a truly disposable asset could do. I pushed the lid of the briefcase open. The polished leather yielded to reveal the meticulously organized contents inside. I bypassed the gold-plated pen entirely, letting my fingers trace the edge of the first heavy crimson folder. I pulled it out and let it drop flat onto the center of the mahogany desk, right on top of their fraudulent power of attorney document. The stark red color contrasted violently against the dark wood, a glaring physical manifestation of a financial stop sign. My father stared at the folder, his thick eyebrows knitting together in heavy confusion. "What is this garbage?" he demanded, though the blistering volume of his voice had dropped a fraction. "I told you to sign the property transfer. I did not ask for a presentation." I ignored his command and flipped the crimson cover open. The crisp white watermarked documents inside rested perfectly aligned. I placed my hands flat on either side of the folder and looked directly at my mother. Her chest was still heaving from her hysterical screaming, but a new highly uncomfortable uncertainty was beginning to flicker behind her eyes. Let us take a brief trip down memory lane, I said, my voice projecting absolute clinical calm. Let us revisit the exact night you decided I was completely disposable. My 27th birthday. 8 years ago. You sat in that expensive French restaurant and took a frantic phone call from Chloe. Do you remember the story she told you, Mom? I am sure it is burned into your memory. She claimed Marcus had been hit by a massive truck. She said there was blood everywhere. She screamed that the police were threatening to drag his critically injured body to a holding cell unless you immediately wired $10,000 for a liability bond. My mother crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her posture defensive. We all remember that traumatic night. She snapped, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus was involved in a horrific collision. We did what any loving family would do. We stepped in to save him from an unjust legal situation. I slid the first document out of the folder and pushed it across the polished desk toward her. I did not say a word as she reluctantly lowered her gaze to the paper. It was not a medical bill. It was not an insurance claim. It was an official certified copy of an arrest report from the Miami-Dade Police Department. There was no truck, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. There was no collision. There was no life-threatening injury. Your self-made visionary son-in-law was not fighting for his life on the side of a highway. He was fighting a bouncer in the back room of an illegal underground high-stakes poker game. My father leaned forward, his eyes darting to the paper. The bold black text at the top of the page clearly displayed Marcus's full legal name, his date of birth, and his booking photograph. His face in the mugshot was bruised, but not from a car crash. It was from a fistfight. I slid the next piece of evidence across the desk, placing it directly beside the arrest report. Read the charges, Dad. The man who supposedly has more integrity in his little finger than I have in my entire body was charged with illegal gambling and aggravated assault. He punched a responding police officer in the jaw when they raided the establishment. He was handcuffed, thrown into the back of a squad car, and hauled off to the county jail. That is impossible, my mother whispered, the color rapidly draining from her face. Her hands dropped to her sides. She stared at the booking photograph, her eyes wide with mounting horror. Chloe said he was bleeding. She said he was dying. Chloe lied, I replied coldly. She sat on a luxury yacht 10 minutes before making that call, drinking champagne and enjoying her vacation. But Marcus slipped away to gamble with money he did not have. When he got arrested, Chloe panicked. She needed exactly $10,000 to secure a premium bail bondsman and a high-powered defense attorney to get him out of a Miami jail cell before the tabloids got a hold of the story. But she had already maxed out her credit cards on designer clothes and five-star hotels. I reached into the red folder one last time. I pulled out a certified bank ledger and a matching wire transfer receipt. I laid them down as the final nail in the coffin of their 8-year delusion. This is the wire transfer you authorized, while I sat across from you with ice water dripping down my dress. I continued, my voice carrying the relentless weight of a judge delivering a sentence. You wired $10,000 directly to a Miami bail bondsman. Look at the routing number. Look at the recipient entity. You did not pay a liability bond to the police. You paid a non-refundable fee to a criminal defense firm. You drained your own liquid capital to bail a violent gambling con artist out of jail, and you did it while screaming at me for lacking human compassion. My father picked up the wire transfer receipt with shaking hands. The aggressive, domineering posture he had maintained for the last hour completely evaporated. His shoulders slumped. He stared at the name of the bail bondsman printed clearly on the bank document. The cognitive dissonance that had protected his ego for nearly a decade was finally cracking under the crushing weight of undeniable physical evidence. He could not yell his way out of a certified bank record. He could not intimidate a police report. You believed her, I said, leaning closer to the desk, ensuring they felt the full impact of my words. You believed her absurd, legally impossible story without asking a single question. You threw me away, disowned me, and left me with a $4,200 bill because you were so desperate to play the hero for a golden child who was actively robbing you blind. My mother stumbled backward, her legs hitting the edge of the leather sofa. She collapsed onto the cushions, her hand covering her mouth. The heavy silence in the study was no longer intimidating. It was the sound of total catastrophic realization. They had built their entire moral superiority on a foundation of lies. They had alienated their only honest daughter to protect a violent criminal. I watched my parents process the destruction of their reality. My father's breathing grew shallow and rapid. He dropped the wire transfer receipt back onto the desk, as if the paper itself had burned his fingers. The man who had just threatened to destroy my professional reputation was now completely speechless, staring blankly at the mugshot of the son-in-law he had just praised as a visionary leader. My mother remained frozen on the sofa, her eyes darting frantically between the police report and my face. The illusion of Chloe's perfect suburban life was tearing apart right in front of her. The daughter she had worshipped had manipulated her, extorted her, and treated her like a gullible fool. "You sacrificed me to save a thug," I concluded quietly, letting the absolute finality of my statement settle over them. "You chose him, and now you are going to see exactly what that choice has cost you." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the second folder. I placed the second crimson folder flat onto the desk, aligning it perfectly next to the first one. The heavy thud of the thick cardstock hitting the mahogany wood made my father flinch. I did not open it immediately. I let the anticipation stretch, allowing the suffocating reality of Marcus's arrest report to fully settle into their minds. My mother was still staring at the mugshot, her chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. "You thought the $10,000 wire transfer was the end of the crisis," I said softly, my voice cutting through the thick silence of the study. "You thought you paid the liability bond and saved the day. But Marcus was facing felony charges. He needed high-powered legal representation to keep him out of state prison and to scrub the arrest from the public record before it ruined his budding image as a visionary entrepreneur. And high-powered fixers do not work for free." I flipped open the second folder. Inside was a timeline I had meticulously reconstructed using their own banking records and tax filings. I pulled out a series of withdrawal statements and placed them in a neat row across the polished wood. "Look at the dates, Dad," I instructed. 3 days after my birthday dinner, 5 days after, 12 days after. You did not just empty your checking account. Chloe convinced you that Marcus was being unfairly targeted by a corrupt legal system. She called you crying every single day, claiming his business rivals were trying to destroy him, and you swallowed every single word. You logged into your primary retirement portfolio and initiated 3 separate massive liquidations. My father's eyes tracked the highlighted numbers on the withdrawal statements. His hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. "You pulled out $250,000? I stated, the cold, hard numbers echoing in the quiet room. "You incurred severe early withdrawal penalties. You paid atrocious capital gains taxes. You set your own retirement timeline back by at least a decade. You bled your own future dry to fund a criminal defense team for a man who punched a cop over an illegal poker game. And Chloe orchestrated every single transfer. She knew exactly what she was asking you to sacrifice, and she did not lose a single second of sleep over it." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying realization. "Thomas, she told us the business was under attack. She said if we did not help, they would lose everything, and she would be out on the street." "She played you like a cheap instrument, Mom," I replied, refusing to offer even an ounce of comfort. "She identified your weakness. She knew you needed to feel like the wealthy, benevolent saviors. She gave you a fabricated crisis, and you handed her $250,000 on a silver platter. You bought her a lie." Right at that precise moment, the heavy brass doorknob turned. The locked door rattled, followed by a sharp, impatient knock. "Mom! Dad, what is taking so long in there?" Chloe called out through the thick wood. Her voice was laced with profound annoyance. "The caterers are setting up the dessert station, and everyone is asking where you are. Are you done dealing with Vivian yet?" My father did not move. He stood frozen over the desk, staring at the financial autopsy of his life savings. My mother pushed herself up from the leather sofa. Her legs were shaky, her movements entirely devoid of their usual graceful elegance. She walked unsteadily to the door and turned the deadbolt. The heavy door swung open. Chloe stood in the hallway holding a fresh glass of champagne, her champagne silk gown shimmering under the corridor lights. She wore a look of intense irritation, clearly annoyed that her perfect party was being delayed by family business. "You guys need to wrap this up," Chloe sighed, stepping into the study. She did not even look at me. "Marcus is getting ready to make a toast and he needs his audience." She finally looked up from her champagne glass and noticed the absolute devastation written across my parents' faces. Her condescending smile faltered. She looked at the red folders spread across the mahogany desk, then at the scattered documents and finally at me. "What is going on?" Chloe asked, her voice losing its demanding edge, replaced by a sudden creeping anxiety. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" My father slowly picked up the Miami-Dade police report. His hand was trembling so violently that the paper rattled. He turned toward his golden child. The fierce protective admiration he usually reserved for her was completely gone. In its place was a look of profound, unadulterated horror. He held the mugshot up so Chloe could see it. "Is this what a truck collision looks like, Chloe?" my father asked. His voice was no longer a booming roar. It was a hollow, broken whisper. "Is this what a targeted business attack looks like?" Chloe stared at the booking photograph of Marcus. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face in a matter of seconds. The glass of champagne slipped from her fingers, crashing onto the hardwood floor. The expensive liquid splashed across the toes of her designer shoes, but she did not even flinch. "Dad, I can explain," Chloe stammered, taking a desperate step backward. "It is not what it looks like. Vivian is lying to you. She is trying to turn you against me." My mother walked slowly toward Chloe. She stepped right through the puddle of spilled champagne. She stopped inches from the daughter she had worshipped, the daughter she had sacrificed me for. "You told me he was bleeding on the side of a highway," my mother said, her voice shaking with devastating clarity. "You sat on a yacht and called me screaming. You made me throw your sister out of a restaurant on her birthday. You made us drain our retirement funds to pay a bail bondsman. You lied to us. You stole from us." "Mom, please," Chloe begged, her voice pitching into that familiar, hysterical whine she always used to get her way. "You have to understand. Marcus made a mistake, but we fixed it. We are building an empire now. You cannot listen to Vivian. She is just jealous." "No one is jealous of you, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through her pathetic defense. "They are not looking at a successful woman. They are looking at a con artist. They are looking at a parasite who manipulated their love to fund a criminal." My father dropped the police report onto the desk. He looked at Chloe as if he were seeing a complete stranger. The illusion was shattered. The perfect, loving daughter did not exist. The golden child was nothing but a mirage built on stolen money and ruthless manipulation. They stood in stunned silence, staring at the woman they had chosen over me. They were finally seeing the true cost of their favoritism. But the financial bleeding was not just in the past. It was happening right now, and the worst was yet to come. The heavy oak door swung wide open. Marcus strode into the room, his arrogant swagger filling the space. He stopped staring at the spilled champagne. "What is going on in here?" Marcus demanded. He wrapped a protective arm around Chloe, pulling her close. Marcus locked eyes with me, his lip curling in disgust. "I should have known," he spat, pointing at my face. "You walk in here after 8 years and try to poison these people against us. You are a pathetic, jealous clerk. You spend your life staring at spreadsheets making pennies, and you cannot stand that I am building a multi-million-dollar empire." I honestly did not flinch. I did not raise my voice at all. I simply picked up the thickest red folder and tossed it effortlessly onto the center of the desk. "A multi-million-dollar empire," I repeated, my voice echoing with icy amusement. "That is a fascinating way to describe a catastrophic, heavily leveraged Ponzi scheme." Marcus stiffened, but he quickly recovered, letting out a mocking laugh. "A Ponzi scheme. Listen to the little bookkeeper using big words she learned on the internet. You do not understand the first thing about commercial real estate, Vivian. I leverage debt to acquire prime assets. It is called capital structuring. I would not expect you to comprehend institutional wealth." I stepped around the desk, closing the distance between us with deliberate intent. I stood inches away from the man who had mocked me, radiating absolute authority. "Let me introduce myself, Marcus," I said. I am the Senior Director of Forensic Accounting for the premier financial investigative firm on Wall Street. I dismantle corporate crime syndicates for the federal government, and as of 48 hours ago, I am the lead investigator personally assigned to dismantle you. The arrogant smirk vanished from Marcus's face instantly. His jaw dropped. The hand resting on Chloe's shoulder suddenly went slack. I flipped the heavy red folder open. I did not show him a standard police report this time. I showed him a highly classified document bearing the official, unmistakable seal of the Internal Revenue Service. You are not building an empire, I stated. You have 23 registered shell companies, and every single one is financially radioactive. You are $4 million in the red. You acquire crumbling strip malls with predatory loans, using new capital to pay off furious investors from previous ventures. The rest of the cash funds your leased sports cars, your custom suits, and that stolen diamond on your wife's finger. You set up a completely fake charity foundation in Delaware, just to funnel offshore deposits back into your personal checking account. I tracked those specific transfers through 3 different international banks before they landed in your private vault. The sheer arrogance it takes to leave a paper trail that obvious is truly staggering. You left digital fingerprints all over the internet thinking your flashy smile could hide your miserable crimes. You are a total, absolute, and unforgivable fraud. Marcus took a step backward, his eyes frantically scanning the heavily redacted IRS documents I had laid out on the desk. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a choked sound came out. Thomas stared at Marcus, his hands shaking. $4 million, my father whispered, the reality of the numbers crushing the last remaining breath from his lungs. You told me the Atlanta project was fully funded. You told me our money was secured in a high-yield escrow account. There is no Atlanta project, Dad, I interjected coldly. The property is a condemned lot facing imminent foreclosure. He did not put your money in escrow. He used your retirement funds to pay off a loan shark in Miami so they would not break his legs. You are lying. Marcus suddenly roared, his panic transforming into erratic, frantic rage. He lunged toward the desk, attempting to snatch the documents, but I slammed my hand down flat on top of the files, pinning them to the wood. Do not touch my evidence, I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. These documents belong to the federal government. The Internal Revenue Service audited your entire fraudulent network 6 months ago. They realized you were laundering money through multiple state lines, so they outsourced the financial extraction to my firm. I have spent the last 2 days tracing every single dime you have ever stolen. I have all the wire transfers, the forged loan applications, and the bounced checks. I have it all wrapped up with a neat little bow. Marcus backed away slowly, his broad chest heaving with every ragged breath. Cold sweat beaded heavily on his forehead, completely ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. He looked wildly around the locked room like a trapped animal desperately seeking an exit that simply did not exist. You cannot do this, Marcus stammered, his booming voice reduced to a pathetic, trembling whine. I can fix it. I just need a little more time to liquidate some assets. I have powerful investors lined up. I can make everyone whole. Time is the one commodity you are completely out of, I replied, offering him a smile completely devoid of mercy. You see, when a federal investigation reaches the point where they contract a firm like mine, the auditing phase is already over. The execution phase has begun. My final report was digitally transmitted to the Department of Justice 3 hours before I boarded my flight. I paused, letting the absolute terror flood his eyes, before delivering the final fatal blow. The FBI is not sending you a warning letter, Marcus. They are conducting a coordinated multi-state raid on your corporate offices tomorrow morning at exactly 6 o'clock. They are seizing your bank accounts, your servers, and your leased vehicles. There will be armed federal agents kicking your doors off the hinges while you are pouring your morning coffee. You are not a businessman facing a liquidity constraint. You are a federal criminal staring down 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary. The dark, opulent study descended instantly into a completely suffocating and paralyzing silence. Marcus stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, his entire body trembling as the catastrophic weight of his future crashed down upon him. He was officially a dead man walking, and he finally truly knew it. The air in the study thickened, suffocating, and charged with the static of impending violence. Marcus looked at me, then at the scattered documents, his eyes darting like a trapped bird. The silence was not a pause. It was a grave waiting to be filled. His gaze swung toward Chloe, his betrayal mirrored in the jagged shards of his own crumbling facade. He had spent years projecting the image of a titan, but now stripped of his Ponzi scheme and his federal immunity, he was just a desperate man looking for a scapegoat to drag down with him into the abyss. "You set me up!" Marcus snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that sounded nothing like the charismatic entrepreneur he played for the country club set. He pivoted on his heels, abandoning his attempt to intimidate me and focusing his mounting fury entirely on my sister. "You were the one managing the books, Chloe. You were the one reconciling the investor ledgers. You told me the Atlanta account was bulletproof. You said the money was safe." Chloe did not shrink away. She did not cry. She did not offer a hysterical performance of innocence. She stood her ground, her spine rigid, her eyes turning into chips of cold flint. She had anticipated this moment for months, perhaps even years. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a small encrypted thumb drive, and tapped it against her palm. "Oh, shut up, Marcus," Chloe retorted, her voice dripping with a newfound jagged authority. "Do not try to pin your incompetence on me. I knew exactly what you were doing. I saw the patterns of your greed long before the feds did. While you were busy playing the big shot, buying tailored suits on credit and leasing Ferraris we could not afford, I was playing the long game." She looked at our parents, who were standing petrified, their mouths agape, as their world disintegrated before their eyes. "She wasn't just managing the books, Dad," I interjected, stepping back to let the carnage unfold. "She was the architect of her own exit strategy." Chloe's lips curled into a smile, not the bright, performative smile she gave guests, but a sharp predator's grin. I walked over to the desk and pulled the third crimson folder from my briefcase. I had held it back for this exact moment. I flipped it open and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, a bank statement from a private institution in the Cayman Islands. While Marcus was busy defrauding investors to pay off loan sharks, Chloe was busy securing her own future. I said, watching the blood drain from Marcus's face. "She opened a private offshore account 6 months ago. The primary signatory is Chloe alone. The source of the initial $500,000 deposit, a direct wire transfer from the holding account of your Atlanta Development Fund." The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the frantic, shallow breathing of my mother. Marcus stared at the document, his face twisting in a grotesque mask of shock and rage. He snatched the paper from the desk, his eyes scanning the numbers. He roared a sound of pure primal fury that shook the portraits hanging on the walls. "You stole $500,000! Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "You were siphoning off my liquidity while I was fighting to keep the fund afloat. You planned to leave me to take the fall alone." Marcus lunged. He was a man with nothing left to lose, driven by the frantic, destructive impulse of a cornered predator. He crashed into Chloe, his hands clawing at her silk gown. She screamed a high, piercing sound that finally shattered my mother's paralysis. Helen shrieked, clutching her chest while Thomas scrambled to pull Marcus away, his own physical strength failing him in his terror. They were a mess of limbs and fabric, a tangled knot of panic and mutual destruction. The man who had been the family's crown jewel of success was now a frantic animal. The woman who had been the golden child was now revealed as an opportunistic thief. My parents were screaming, the sound a chaotic discordance of regret and helplessness. I stood back observing the scene with a chilling sense of equilibrium. This was the true nature of the life they had curated. It was built on greed sustained by lies, and now it was dying in a puddle of spilled champagne and broken furniture. They had chosen this. They had chosen the glitter over the gold, the performance over the person. "Get off her!" Thomas yelled, grabbing Marcus by the shoulder, but Marcus was beyond listening. He threw my father aside, sending him stumbling into the bookshelf. I turned to the door, my briefcase securely closed, my mission accomplished. I did not need to lift a finger to punish them. They were tearing each other apart with a violence more profound than any legal filing. I walked out into the foyer, my pace steady and unhurried. The gala guests were pressing against the library door, trying to get a look at the commotion. Their hushed whispers and nervous movements created a frantic, buzzing backdrop. I didn't care what they heard. I didn't care what they witnessed. The facade of the perfect family had been dismantled not by a single act, but by their own rotting foundation. As I made my way toward the front door, the caterers and waitstaff watched me with wide, terrified eyes. I kept my head high. I felt a sense of immense surging power. I was not the one losing a home, a marriage, or a reputation. I was the one walking away entirely whole, leaving the wreckage behind me where it belonged. I reached the heavy brass handle and opened the door, letting the cool night air rush in. I didn't glance back at the study. I didn't need to. I heard my father's desperate shouting, the sound of glass shattering, and the unmistakable frantic wail of my mother begging for order. It was the sound of a legacy ending. I stepped onto the porch and breathed deep. The night air was sweet with the scent of pine and the promise of a life I had built on my own terms. My car waited at the bottom of the steps. The engine hummed with a low, steady power. I had done my job. I had delivered the truth. The rest, the lawyers, the FBI, the fallout could handle itself. For the first time in 35 years, I was going to sleep in a house where everything in it was truly mine. And tomorrow I would wake up and start a new, honest life, far from the ruins of this family. I had never felt more alive. I had my hand on the cold door handle of the waiting town car when the mahogany front doors of the mansion violently burst open behind me. The heavy wood slammed against the exterior brick with a deafening crash. I turned around slowly. My father came storming out onto the grand portico. His tailored suit jacket was torn at the shoulder, a physical casualty of his desperate attempt to pull Marcus off of Chloe inside the study. His tie was yanked sideways and his chest heaved with aggressive, jagged breaths. In his place stood a frantic, ruined man, looking for a scapegoat to absorb his catastrophic failures. "You do not get to just walk away from this," Thomas roared, marching down the wide stone steps. "You do not get to stroll into my house, destroy my family, and then get into a chauffeured car like you won. Get off my property. I am throwing you out. You are officially banished from this estate." I kept my hand resting easily on the car door. "You cannot throw someone out who is already leaving, Dad," I replied, my voice carrying effortlessly through the crisp night air. "And there is no family left inside that house to destroy. They destroyed themselves. I just handed them the mirror." My father stopped at the bottom of the steps, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You think you hold all the cards because you work for some bureaucratic financial firm?" He spat, his eyes wild with venomous greed. "You think you can leave us drowning in Marcus's mess while you sit on a gold mine? I will make you pay for the humiliation you caused tonight. First thing Monday morning, I am hiring the most ruthless estate litigators on the East Coast. I am taking you to court. We are going to sue you for full control of your grandmother's mountain cabin. We will claim you manipulated a dying woman. I will drag you through endless, agonizing litigation until you are entirely bankrupt. I will seize that property by absolute legal force. We will liquidate that $1.5 million asset to recoup the capital Chloe and Marcus stole from my retirement accounts. I will bleed you dry until you are begging on your knees for a fraction of what you used to have. You will hand over that cabin, or I will destroy your entire life." The quiet of the suburban night settled heavily over the driveway. My father stood there breathing hard, fully expecting me to crumble under the sheer weight of his legal threats. He expected the frightened girl who would desperately try to appease him. Instead of cowering, I let out a genuine, echoing laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement that rang out across the dark driveway. My father faltered, his aggressive posture collapsing as my laughter derailed his intimidation tactic. "What is so funny?" he demanded into a confused, dangerous growl. "You think a massive civil lawsuit is a joke? You think I will not absolutely ruin you in a courtroom?" I stopped laughing and leaned comfortably against the sleek black exterior of the town car. I looked at him with profound, chilling pity. "I think you are going to have a remarkably difficult time suing me for an asset that I do not even own anymore," I stated smoothly. My father froze. The aggressive forward momentum of his body completely stalled. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, the confusion masking his rage. "The trust stated the cabin was yours. We have the tax records. It is sitting right there in the mountains." I shook my head slowly, savoring the absolute destruction of his final, desperate backup plan. "You have old tax records, Dad. You have outdated assumptions because you never actually paid attention to my life. You assumed I left grandmother's legacy gathering dust because I was too weak to manage it. But you fundamentally underestimated who I am." I stepped away from the car, closing the distance between us. "I legally claimed the deed to that cabin exactly 5 years ago, the very minute the trust provisions allowed me to take full executive control. I did not let it sit empty. I immediately put it on the commercial market. And because I actually know how to negotiate high-value real estate, unlike your fraudulent son-in-law, I did not sell it for $1.5 million. I sold it to a luxury resort developer for a flat $2 million in cash." The color drained instantly from my father's face. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. He looked like a man who had just watched his last lifeboat sink to the bottom of the ocean. $2 million, I repeated, letting the massive number hang heavily in the cold air. "And do you want to know what I did with that capital?" "I used every single cent of that $2 million as initial seed capital. I used it to establish the forensic accounting division at my firm. I used grandmother's money to build the exact investigative empire that is currently dismantling Marcus's life." My father stumbled backward, his heel catching on the edge of the stone step. He had to grab the thick stone railing to keep himself from collapsing onto the driveway. The safety net he had aggressively planned to steal had been liquidated half a decade ago to fund the very weapon that was currently destroying his family. "You sold it?" My father gasped, his voice completely devoid of the booming aristocratic authority he had wielded for decades. "You sold your grandmother's legacy." "I did not sell her legacy," I corrected him, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "I weaponized it. She gave me that property because she knew I would need armor to protect myself from you and Mother. The cabin is gone, Dad. The money is locked safely inside my corporate infrastructure. Your grand lawsuit is dead before it even reaches a courthouse. You have absolutely nothing to take from me." My father stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant. The fight completely left his body. He was no longer a wealthy patriarch demanding obedience. He was just a broke, desperate man standing in a torn suit on a gravel driveway, realizing he had bet his entire life on the wrong daughter. He had drained his retirement accounts for a con artist, and he had alienated the only person capable of saving him. I reached for the handle of the town car, preparing to deliver the final crushing blow. My hand gripped the polished chrome, but I did not open the door just yet. I turned my head and looked back at the pathetic, crumbling patriarch standing on the gravel driveway. My father was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in erratic, panicked jerks. His eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate realization that his entire world was collapsing around him. "You want to know the most pathetic part of your entire master plan tonight?" I asked, letting my voice carry through the quiet, crisp, suburban air. "It is not that you drained your retirement accounts for a con artist. It is not even that you tried to intimidate me into handing over a multi-million-dollar property. The most pathetic part is that piece of paper currently sitting on your mahogany desk." My father blinked, his mind struggling to process my words through his mounting terror. "The power of attorney document," he stammered, his voice weak and raspy. I let out a sharp, mocking scoff. "That document was an absolute insult to the legal profession. I recognized the formatting the second I walked into your study. You printed a generic boilerplate property transfer template off the internet. You probably spent $49 on a discount legal website and thought it was a foolproof strategy to seize my assets. But here is the truly hilarious part, Dad. Even if I had not sold grandmother's cabin 5 years ago, that specific piece of paper was entirely and completely useless." He stared at me, the confusion masking his aggressive posture. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, clutching the stone railing of the steps. I stepped slightly away from the car, ensuring he heard every single syllable of his own humiliation. Grandmother did not just leave me a physical property. She wrapped that asset in an ironclad, irrevocable trust designed specifically to protect me from you and Mother. The stipulations of her trust explicitly voided any transfer of ownership executed under duress, emotional coercion, or without the presence of my own independent legal counsel. That cheap piece of paper you slammed on your desk was not a legal binding contract. It was a worthless prop. It did not have the power to transfer a single blade of grass, let alone a $1.5 million estate. The color continued to drain from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. You knew my father breathed out the realization dawning on him like a physical blow. You knew the document was garbage the entire time you were standing in the study. Of course I knew, I replied, my voice dripping with absolute freezing contempt. I am a senior financial investigator. I deal with complex corporate structuring and high-level asset protection every single day. You honestly thought you could lock me in a room, scream at me, and force me to sign away my inheritance with a cheap internet printout. But I did not point out the legal flaws. I did not tell you the cabin was already sold. I stood there and I let you play your hand. I let you and Mother put on your grand theatrical performance. But why, he asked, his voice cracking with a mixture of despair and sheer disbelief. Why would you stand there and let us demand the property if you knew it was already gone? Because I needed to see just how thoroughly rotten your core truly was, I stated, stepping closer to the bottom of the stone stairs. When I uncovered Marcus's federal tax evasion and saw that your own bank accounts were rapidly draining, I knew exactly what you were planning. I knew you were desperate for liquid cash. I knew you would target the only remaining asset you thought was vulnerable. I came to this Ruby anniversary party specifically to test you. I wanted to see if 8 years of separation had humbled you. I wanted to see if facing absolute financial ruin had taught you any shred of basic human decency. I paused, letting the cold reality of my words sink deep into his bones. I gave you a chance, Dad. When we walked into that study, you could have asked me for professional help. You could have humbled yourself, admitted that Marcus was failing, and asked your daughter to use her financial expertise to navigate the bankruptcy. If you had shown one single ounce of genuine remorse for how you treated me, I might have actually helped you restructure your debts. My father looked down at the gravel, his shoulders slouching under the crushing weight of his monumental failure. But you did not ask for help. I continued, my tone relentless and unforgiving. You demanded a sacrifice. You isolated me, locked the doors, and attempted to bully me into submission. You and Mother verbally assaulted me. You called me a bitter, childless spinster. You mocked my career. You praised a violent, fraudulent criminal as a visionary leader, while treating your own flesh and blood like a disposable ATM. You proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that you have not changed. You are exactly the same greedy, image-obsessed hypocrites who threw me out of a restaurant 8 years ago. I watched him closely, looking for any sign of a rebuttal. There was none. He was completely out of ammunition. He was a broken man standing in the ruins of his own colossal arrogance. That power of attorney document was never a threat to me, I said, delivering the truth with surgical precision. It was a litmus test for your humanity. And you failed it spectacularly. You destroyed the last remaining bridge between us for a piece of paper that was not even worth the ink printed on it. You threw away your only capable daughter for an absolute phantom. My father slowly raised his head. His eyes were red, filling with tears of profound, selfish regret. Vivian, please, he choked out, reaching a trembling hand out toward me. Please, I did not know. We were desperate. Marcus told us we were going to lose everything. You are going to lose everything. I confirmed, my expression turning to solid ice. But Marcus is not the one taking it from you. I held the crisp white envelope in my hand and turned back to face the man who was about to lose his kingdom. I took a slow, deliberate step away from the town car, closing the distance between us, until I was standing just a few feet away from the bottom of the stone stairs. My father stared at the envelope, his red, tear-filled eyes tracking the movement of my hand. He looked like a cornered animal waiting for the final fatal strike. The cool night breeze rustled the leaves of the towering oak trees. but the silence between us was absolutely deafening. "Do you know what happens to distressed debt, Dad?" I asked, my voice slicing through the cold air with absolute clinical precision. "When a homeowner secretly takes out a massive secondary mortgage to cover a sudden catastrophic cash flow problem, the bank watches them very closely. When that homeowner misses the first payment, the bank sends a polite warning letter. When they miss the second payment, the bank officially flags the account. And when they miss the third consecutive payment, reaching 90 days in default, the bank frequently decides the asset is simply too toxic to keep on their books. So they bundle that bad debt and sell it off to private financial institutions for pennies on the dollar." My father swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his torn, ruined collar. "We missed a few payments," he rasped, his voice trembling with naked, unfiltered fear. "It was just a brief temporary oversight. Marcus assured us the returns from the Atlanta commercial project would cover the mortgage arrears by the end of the quarter. We just needed a little more time to liquidate some other assets." "Marcus does not have any returns," I reminded him harshly, refusing to let him retreat into his delusions. "Marcus does not even have a bank account that is not currently frozen by the federal government. The money you pulled out of the equity of this sprawling suburban mansion is entirely gone. It was swallowed up by his fraudulent Ponzi scheme and funneled directly into Chloe's secret offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. You bet the literal roof over your head on a desperate con artist, and you lost spectacularly." I held the white envelope out toward him, keeping my arm perfectly steady. "But here is the most fascinating part about the secondary debt market," I continued. "When your original lender bundled your defaulted mortgage and put it up for public sale, it caught the attention of a highly aggressive specialized investment firm. They purchase distressed luxury properties, initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings, and liquidate the physical assets to maximize their profit margins. They do not care about your country club memberships or your fragile social status. They only care about the numbers." My father reached out with a violently shaking hand and took the envelope from my grasp. He stared at the blank white paper, terrified to look inside. "Who bought it?" he whispered, his voice cracking under the monumental weight of his own financial ruin. "Who holds the debt to my house?" "My firm," I stated, delivering the words with the devastating force of a sledgehammer. "My division specifically handles the acquisition and liquidation of distressed assets tied to federal fraud investigations. When I saw your property address flag in our internal system 3 days ago, I did not recuse myself. I personally authorized the corporate acquisition of your defaulted mortgage using company capital. I am the senior director overseeing the foreclosure process. My firm legally owns this debt, which means essentially I own this entire house." My father staggered backward, as if he had been physically struck by a freight train. The envelope slipped from his trembling fingers and fluttered to the gravel driveway, landing right next to his polished leather shoes. He looked up at the towering brick facade of the mansion, the grand white columns, the glowing windows of the Ruby Anniversary Gala still happening inside. He looked at the physical manifestation of his entire ego, his status, and his highly curated legacy. It was all completely gone. It belonged to the daughter he spent 35 years calling a failure. "That envelope does not contain a friendly warning," I continued, showing absolutely no mercy as he stared at the fallen paper. "It does not contain a restructuring plan or an offer for a payment extension. That is a formal, legally binding 14-day notice of eviction. It has already been filed with the county clerk and stamped by a judge. You, mother, and whatever remaining pride you have left, have exactly 2 weeks to pack your bags and vacate the premises. If you are still inside this property on the morning of the 15th day, I will personally send the county sheriff to drag you out by your tailored lapels and dump your belongings onto the curb." "Vivian, you cannot do this," my father begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob. He fell to his knees on the sharp gravel, completely abandoning his aristocratic pride. The wealthy patriarch was gone, replaced by a sobbing, broken shell of a man crying in the dirt. "This is our home. You cannot put your mother and father out on the street. Please, I am begging you. We will do anything. I will get a job. I will pay you back every single cent. Just give us time." You did not give me time when you threw me out 8 years ago, I replied, looking down at him kneeling at my feet. You did not offer me an extension when you left me with a $4,000 bill I could not pay. You told me to take a long, hard look at my character. Well, Dad, I took your advice. I looked at my character, and I realized I am ruthless, efficient, and highly successful. I learned exactly how to be absolutely brutal from watching you. I looked down at the weeping man kneeling on the sharp gravel. He was a hollow shell stripped of his arrogance and his stolen wealth. I did not offer him a hand to help him up. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. I simply stepped around his shaking form and turned my attention back toward the grand open doors of the mansion. The night air was no longer filled with the soft, pretentious jazz music of the Ruby Anniversary Gala. Instead, a cacophony of absolute destruction echoed from the depths of the house. The heavy oak doors of the study had been left wide open, and the catastrophic fallout was spilling directly into the foyer. I could hear the unmistakable sound of heavy mahogany furniture being violently overturned. Marcus was tearing the room apart, roaring like a cornered beast as he smashed crystal decanters and hurled priceless antiques against the wall. His fraudulent empire had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but blind, destructive rage. Beneath the sound of shattering glass, I heard the piercing, hysterical sobs of my sister. Chloe was crying, her voice cracking as she shrieked accusations at the man she had planned to abandon. And weaving through it all was the pathetic, high-pitched wailing of my mother. Helen was begging on her knees, pleading for someone, anyone, to restore the perfect illusion she had sacrificed her own daughter to protect. It was a symphony of ultimate ruin. The walls of their majestic suburban fortress could no longer hide the profound rot rotting away at their foundation. I stood by the town car and listened to the chaos for a long, satisfying moment. For 35 years, I had internalized their criticism. I had carried the heavy burden of being their designated failure. But standing here tonight, listening to them tear each other to shreds over money and lies, the final remnants of that toxic conditioning vanished completely. I felt an overwhelming surge of profound liberation. I was not the broken one. I had never been the broken one. The guests who had attended the lavish anniversary gala were now fleeing the mansion in droves. Wealthy couples in tailored suits and silk dresses hurried down the stone steps, their faces pale with shock and embarrassment. They whispered frantically to one another, shooting terrified glances back at the house as the sounds of Marcus destroying the study echoed across the manicured lawns. They practically ran to their luxury vehicles, desperate to escape the massive blast radius of my spectacular family implosion. I watched them scatter like frightened insects. The social standing my parents had desperately tried to protect was now permanently eradicated. By tomorrow morning, the entire country club circuit would be buzzing with the scandalous details of their financial ruin and the impending federal raids. They had cared more about the opinions of these fleeing strangers than they had ever cared about me. Now those same strangers would be the architects of their ultimate social demise. I turned my back on the crumbling mansion and grabbed the chrome door handle of my waiting car. The professional private driver who had stood silently by the vehicle witnessing the entire driveway confrontation unfold from a safe distance quickly stepped forward to respectfully assist me. He pulled the heavy door open, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betraying a deep, unspoken respect. I offered him a polite, genuine nod of gratitude and slid into the spacious back seat. The interior of the town car was a sanctuary of quiet luxury. The thick, soundproof doors clicked shut instantly, severing the frantic screams and the sounds of breaking glass. The abrupt transition from the chaotic screaming reality outside to the tranquil, climate-controlled silence of the vehicle was incredibly jarring, yet deeply soothing. I leaned back into the plush leather seating and closed my eyes for a brief moment. My heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. The adrenaline that had fueled my entire confrontation was beginning to slowly recede, leaving behind a warm, radiant sense of absolute clarity. I had walked into the predator den armed with nothing but the cold, hard truth, and I had systematically dismantled every single monster hiding in the dark. I smoothed my hands over the fabric of my charcoal suit, feeling grounded and whole. The leather briefcase resting on the seat beside me felt significantly lighter now. It had served its ultimate purpose, and I would finally never need it again. As the driver smoothly shifted the car into gear, my cell phone vibrated softly inside my jacket pocket. I pulled the device out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a text message from my partner back in New York City. The message was simple, direct, and completely devoid of any toxic manipulation. It read, "I am incredibly proud of you. I hope you are safe. Let me know when you are heading home. Dinner is on me tonight." A warm, genuine smile spread across my face. This was what real love looked like. It was not built on financial extortion, emotional blackmail, or conditional approval. It was built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a shared vision for an honest future. I rested my thumbs on the digital keyboard and typed my response with steady, deliberate keystrokes. I wrote, "Everything is perfect." I hit send and locked the screen, slipping my phone away. The town car accelerated down the long gravel driveway, its tires crunching quietly over the stones. We passed through the towering wrought iron gates, leaving the suburban estate and the wreckage of my past permanently behind. I looked out the tinted window as the dark trees blurred past, heading straight toward the airport and the bright, limitless skyline of my real home. I was finally truly and completely free. The oppressive weight of my toxic childhood was entirely gone, replaced by an unbreakable, fiercely independent spirit moving forward to embrace a brand new life. The story of Vivian teaches a profound lesson about self-worth and boundaries. Often we exhaust ourselves trying to earn the validation of toxic family members who only view us as disposable assets. However, Vivian's journey illustrates that true power comes from building your own independence and refusing to participate in destructive games. Walking away from toxicity is never a surrender, it is the ultimate declaration of self-respect. Take that first brave step today to set firm boundaries and reclaim your life. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your experiences in the comments below.